It was something that was so private for a long time. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go and perform was a lot of just our society's value. And now we're valuing different things. We're valuing openness and honesty and authenticity in our relationships. And we see what that brings. We feel a different type of connection when they're able to be authentic.
Welcome to For the Health of It, Because You Can, where host Susan Robinson dives into the 8 categories of wellness with experts from various fields. We offer tips and information to help you thrive in all areas of individual wellness.
We're talking about support groups, which we know is one way of making connections and not feeling alone, but there's a lot more to that. And so we've invited Heather Gaglio. She's the clinical director for Calm Waters, and Abby Dimond, who's the one that organizes everything and knows more about the program. And we're going to talk about Calm Waters. This is a service that's been around for a while that I know of. So just to get us going, Abby, what is Calm Waters?
Yeah, so Calm Waters is Central Oklahoma's only grief agency. We exist to serve children and adults and families who've had a significant loss in their lives. We were founded in 1992 when a mother, her name is Sandra, lost her husband, and she was really worried about her 9-year-old son. He was not coping well with his father's loss. And they saw a 60 Minutes episode actually about a grief center up in Portland called the Dougie Center. The Dougie Center provided support groups for kids and who had a death in their life. And so they looked around and around for something that was similar in Oklahoma, and they couldn't find anything. No support groups for kids who'd lost a parent, no support groups really at all for children. And so they started calling therapists, and they worked their way through the phone book. They started calling every therapist they could. And after, the 100 and something one they found, they reached Charlotte Lankard, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's with Integris at the time. And she said, nothing like that currently exists, but we should make it. And so they partnered with Integris to just create the first support groups of Calm Waters. Started with support groups in the basement of Integris Baptist, and it has just grown over the past 32 years to include all kinds of support groups for multiple different kinds of loss in our center in downtown Oklahoma City, and also in schools across the metro, and even a private counseling clinic.
Oh, so you do have a counseling clinic, but you say you are now going into the schools.
We do both. So yeah, we are free programs. So we offer free grief support groups at our center for all ages, free divorce support groups for all ages at our center. We provide free support groups in schools. We're in about 40 to 50 schools every semester in Central Oklahoma. And then we also have private counseling specifically for grief because of a death.
Okay. So I've had state employees actually ask me about, can we start a grief support group? I know that I lost my mom a year ago, just last week. And so I know that there was times that you start, you think you're going to be strong, but then you start experiencing things that you didn't think you would. And so I think that's awesome that is available. So if someone's never been to a support group, what kind of a format would you say that you could tell them, like what would go on actually in a support group meeting?
Yeah, our support groups, we try and keep it to about 12 for adults, about 8 to 10 for children. And we really have a wide variety of types of people, but we do try and put people together in a group who have some commonalities. That might be the type of loss that they had, whether it be a suicide loss, a homicide loss, or perhaps pregnancy or infertility. But we also have who that person was to that individual. So if it was a parent, a child who was under the age of 18, over the age of 18. So we know that finding community in times of loss is incredibly important. And so we want people to feel understood, connected, and we know that sometimes it does come from either who that person was to you or how they died.
So did you see a rise in people utilizing Calm Waters during or since the pandemic?
That's a really interesting question. And I think the pandemic really opened up a lot of people to the idea of mental health support, perhaps people who never really saw the need for themselves in particular were really faced with a unique situation where now they are experiencing something more challenging or more difficult. Perhaps they're feeling more isolated or alone, more anxious. And I think those symptoms that people were feeling prompted more reaching out. And so I think just people talking about it is one thing too. The more we talk about something, the more we can connect with others and recognize it in ourselves, in our communities, in our loved ones, and really encourage others to get support. So I do think that just the nature of the pandemic and talking about mental health kind of really combined into something really great. Sounds like a weird way to put it, but it did open up the conversation for more people who weren't talking about mental health.
Right. And it kind of, there's always been a stigma around mental health. And I think people finally, when they went through that, realized, yes, I do need help. And there's a lot of other people out there. During the pandemic, I met with our EAP manager, and we met with agencies throughout during the whole pandemic, that year and a half. And there were many that lost friends, families. I know I lost my only living aunt, and she was in California, and there's no way we could go. I lost a cousin, and it was just like you couldn't go. And I've heard so many stories from employees losing not only coworkers, but family. And it was just a really tough time.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of nice to hear that people kind of dropping that guard and maybe getting rid of the stigma behind it. Not sure why that stigma's there. Maybe they don't think why do you think there's a stigma?
I think it was something that was so private for a long time. I think society deemed it as private, right? That happens behind closed doors. We don't talk about it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go and perform was a lot of just our society's value. And now we're valuing different things. We're valuing openness and honesty and authenticity in our relationships. And we see what that brings. When you talk to someone and they share in a vulnerable moment, we feel a different type of connection when they're able to be authentic and really talk true from the heart. And so I think that really is becoming more valued than this living in isolation and not talking about the hard things.
Yeah. So I've also wondered, do you see many military people come through and families of military?
So that's really interesting. At Calm Waters, we don't have a ton of military families or individuals. We do serve children in the schools who are experiencing deployment of a parent. And so that is one way we are serving those families. But for individual counseling or in our support groups at the center, we don't, to my knowledge, have a whole lot of representation from that community.
Okay. All right. So what can we tell people that the benefits of attending this type of support group? I think I'd sent a whole long list of things that I was reading. And so hearing that from you, the therapist, what would you say is going to help somebody? What's the benefit of them attending this?
I think first and foremost, it goes back to relationships and talking about the things that are hardest for us. It can be so scary. And sometimes we don't have relationships outside of, a specific group to talk about that with. And so coming together and having a common experience can really help us feel understood, that we're not alone. There's some really wonderful, beautiful stories from our support group participants that they were kind of really riddled with this guilt and shame about a specific experience they're having related to their loss. And when the other person across the table says the thing that you've been hiding for so long, you just feel so seen. And you can start letting some of that guilt and shame go and start to heal and recognize that I'm not alone. If this person, this complete stranger across from me is also experiencing this, then I must not be crazy. And I use that term because that is how they feel. But I think there's just so much power in having that open dialogue and hearing from others who are going through something so similar. It can bring so much relief. You learn a lot from each other, how one person is handling things, might not be the same as how you have, but you might learn something from them. You might gain a tool or a resource or even just understanding.
I think we have, if I might share a story that we've had, we had a woman who came into Calm Waters. Before she came, she was telling us about just her grief. She and her husband had been married for 40 years. She was, I think, 65, and her husband passed away. And so their kids were all grown up, moved out, had their own families. And she was telling us about how her house felt too big. She would walk around and it was like the walls were echoing. It was just lonely without her husband, but especially her bed was lonely. The space that used to be taken up by her husband was now empty. It was just too big for her. And so she started coping by taking her pillow and taking her blanket and moving to her closet and falling asleep on the floor there. And so she, like Heather was saying, she felt like she was grieving wrong. She was like, no one has ever talked about this. All my friends who maybe have lost a husband or anyone I know, like they all seem to, continue on with their lives. Why am I so frozen and I can't cope and I'm sleeping in my closet? So she just thought she was falling apart, in her words. And so she came to Calm Waters and she was in the support group for spouse loss over the age of 55. And so she was sitting in group and it was the first session and they were talking about their grief story. And so, you go around in the circle. And so the woman before her was talking about how ever since her husband died, her house was too empty, her bed was too big, and she was sleeping in her closet. And so our friend that we're talking about, she was just floored. She was like, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was doing this wrong. I thought something was fundamentally wrong with me because I just couldn't get over it, in air quotes. But she realized there was someone literally sitting right next to her who was going through the same thing. And that just meant the world to have the friend, have the community, have the support, and just know that, okay, we're going to learn our coping skills and lean on each other. And I do have hope for a future. Even though my husband isn't here and she's never going to stop grieving him. She could see a path forward into what her, living her life even without him. So I think that, just like Heather was saying, just looking across the room being like, oh, you're going through this too. We weren't talking about it, so I felt so alone. It just made an incredible difference for her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great story.
And I want to pinpoint the word hope. We hear that so many times in support groups that people come in at the hardest time of their life in such despair and loneliness and depression. And it's finding hope again, being with others and seeing them grow. Perhaps they're later on in their grief journey. Perhaps they've grown in the presence of others, but you hear so often that they didn't come with much hope, but they leave with a ton of it. And I think that is setting people up for success, right? You're never going to not miss your person, but there's hope to be had in finding a way to move forward and to continue on.
Our support groups at Calm Waters are completely for free. We never want costs to be a burden on a family or an individual who's already facing a lot of hardship. We know that grief is expensive. There are hospital bills, there are funeral costs, there might be the loss of an income earner in the home, and it is staggering. And so Calm Waters groups are completely for free to make sure we aren't adding that burden. So our support groups at our center and also in schools. We also provide private grief counseling, and for that we accept most major insurances, Sooner Care, Medicaid, and then we have a sliding scale structure that's income-based, so it can go pretty much as low as the client needs it. We are really trying our best to make sure all of our programs are accessible and are there for everybody, because grief is for everybody. There are no income limits or demographics that exclude you from it. So
yeah. So I know that going through a divorce is not like a death. Sometimes having experienced it myself, knowing, when you thought your life would be forever with that person and it didn't end up that way, it's a different kind of grief, I think. Am I right? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, and the kids, hindsight, you wish that you had had a place to go where you could have taken your child with you.
Absolutely.
And so it's a lot more, I felt like people can carry baggage a lot, even though they've got friends and family around them. There was something about processing it that didn't get done. And so you carry that baggage on for a lot longer than you should have,
Absolutely.
I guess. Am I right?
Absolutely. I don't think a lot of people recognize divorce as a grief or a loss. So, people call it a choice, right? And for some, yes, it is, but for others, it's not. But even if it was your quote unquote choice, it's not what you would have hoped for. It's not what you went into this relationship wanting, or you wanting for your children. And so there is a sense of loss in a future and a life that you thought you were going to have, a loss of identity. And there's so much wrapped up in that of course you're grieving it too, but a lot of people don't recognize that, so they're not allowing themselves to grieve something. I think a lot of people are told, oh, you should be happy, you don't have to deal with X, Y, and Z anymore. And for some, that's true. I think there's, some happiness or joy, but there's also some sadness and heartbreak on the other side of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a feeling of, how did I fail?
Yeah.
And will I ever think of opening myself up again? Or would I? Or maybe making that choice not to. And so anyway, I think this is a great thing you guys can offer, and hopefully we can partner. I don't know if I have you on our website, but I'm going to definitely put you on our
Absolutely.
website, because people have been asking me, is there a grief support group? And so I want to make sure that you guys are well known about that. So is there any last things you would like to say to state employees who might be listening to this?
We would love to help support in any way we can. We do a lot of trainings that are for lay people. If you're just interested in learning more about how to support yourself or others through a grief or loss experience, we're doing that through partnership with the Department of Mental Health. So we're doing 4 times a year. So we have one coming up, and we're traveling. They'll be in Muskogee this month, Oklahoma City in November. And so just keep an eye out for upcoming trainings. We're also open to tailoring different trainings. So in different types of workplaces, we experience loss in different ways. So very open to just coming out, talking about grief. We know it's a hard thing to talk about. A lot of people don't know what to say or how to say it. And so we want to be the educators in that space.
It's true. And sometimes they don't even know it's grief that they're going through, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if someone is looking for services for themselves or for someone they know who's experienced a loss, they can find all of the registration for our support groups or how to sign up as a counseling client at calmwaters.org. All the information is there for themselves, for their children, in whatever capacity they need, and they can always reach out to us at any point, like Heather said, to customize.
Yeah. So where's your location?
We are at 4th and Walker, so kind of like downtown, midtown area of Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you used to be by Integris, though, right?
We used to be over there, yeah. We moved to be a little bit more central to the north and the south getting to us, so.
Okay. I appreciate you guys being here, and I feel like, now I have a tool now that I can offer to employees, and because it is much needed. And so appreciate you guys being here so very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to For the Health of It. For more wellness tips, information, and videos, visit the Thrive webpage. For questions, contact us at thrive@omes.ok.gov.